Hey, deserving listeners, today's episode is part 2 of my deep dive on obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. This episode, along with all the deep dive episodes, are only available to patrons. So if you're a patron, you're going to hear this whole episode. And if you're not, then you're only going to hear a little introduction. So I just wanted to say that up front. In the last episode, I described a lot of the core symptoms and the underlying schemas that were involved. In this episode, I want to start by talking about the different types. And I feel like when we describe the different types of OCPD or obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, this is when I feel like you really understand what this disorder is like. And I'm going to provide some examples of each type as well from actual people. So that's what we're going to do. And for this introduction available to everyone, I'm going to describe one of the types. And I think I have, like 8 or 9 types that I've developed. So I'm going to describe the first one. And in my opinion, OCPD really presents itself differently in different people. And that's why when you read descriptions online of OCPD, it can be hard sometimes to understand how it really manifests, and it's also hard to see it in some people because perfectionism, pathological perfectionism, can manifest in some very different ways. So let's go into the first type that I want to describe, which I'm calling the all-perfect versus self-punishment perfectionist. So it's a bit of a long, clunky label, and I kept reworking this title, but this type that I'm identifying is called the all-perfect versus self-punishment perfectionist. So these people with OCPD are obsessed with their own impulses. They feel less fear of abandonment when they're punishing themselves somehow. And they were rejected and punished as children because they were bad, quote unquote. So with each of these types, I'm going to elucidate what they're obsessed with, particularly what behaviors they engage in that make them feel less fear of abandonment, because I consider that to be the core of OCPD, the shame, the flaw shame that I talked about last episode. And they developed that flaw shame and that fear of abandonment, of imperfection, because they were rejected and or punished because of some behavior that they were exhibiting when they were children. So this type, they vacillate between an all-perfect mode and a self-punishment mode. They are focused on their impulses versus their discipline of perfectionism. So let me give an example. These are all from Reddit or from YouTube, and I have thought about the ethics of reading. These are personal accounts that people are posting on Reddit, and I feel I didn't ask them for permission to read these descriptions, but I looked into the ethics on it, and the consensus is that it's not an ethical violation to read these because they already posted them in a public forum that's available to literally everyone on the planet already. And there's nothing identifying about these people. Even their username isn't identifiable really. So but I think that these accounts that I found on subreddits, there's an OCPD subreddit, and there's also a perfectionism subreddit that is a pretty good resource for people with these issues, in my opinion. So this first example is from Reddit, and the person says, so OCPD is mainly about the extensive need to be in control, even if it comes at the cost of actually achieving things. Currently, I am struggling with this thing called perfectionism paralysis. I want every single aspect of my life to be absolutely perfect, and if even one tiny little thing goes wrong, then I just abandon the whole day and I become the opposite of my perfect self. So that way, I'm still in control, because if things go wrong or I fail, I can point out and say that I was still in control. Here's the kicker. I completely understand how irrational this behavior is, and there's nothing I can do to change it. I need to control every single thing in my life, and if I can't, then I get really mad and just stop functioning altogether. End of Reddit post. So you really hear that vacillation between being extremely disciplined and controlled and perfectionistic, and then burning out, and then there's completely giving up and lack of functioning and just falling apart. Another description here. This is a pretty good one. I have a hard time with the fact that some of my compulsions are healthy, like diet, exercise, studying, cleaning, etc. Basically, my cycle is to push myself to an extreme until I burn out and sink into a deep depression. I've come to the realization that most of my hobbies are actually thinly veiled attempts to be an elite person and whatever the opposite of a lazy bad person is. I'm currently in the burnt out and depressed part of my cycle. It's hard for me to motivate myself to do anything because I know that no matter how clean my house is or how fit I am, I still think that I am worthless, I'm a bad person, and so what's the point? My therapist told me to do my compulsions, but at 30%. After a few weeks of drinking, crying, smoking weed, and doing nothing, today I did a little 30-minute workout, laundry, dried my hair, cleaned the kitchen, and I might do a short walk. I feel the urge when I'm in the middle of it to go too far, and I keep reminding myself 30%, 30%, 30%. End of post. So I don't know if this person has OCPD, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did. That they're describing, again, among this, so this is just the first out of my 9 different types of OCPD, but the hallmarks of this type is that vacillation between pushing yourself and really trying to be perfect about your body or about a hobby or about your house or about your work, and then getting burnt out and then completely flopping to the other side and just completely giving up. And either mode, you don't feel good. You feel ashamed in either mode. You feel worthless in either mode. You feel like when you're striving for perfectionism, you're neglecting other areas of your life. You're pushing yourself too much. When you're completely giving up, you feel like a loser. And so for this type, they will vacillate between these two positions. So the third example here from Reddit is, I punish myself through refusing to eat. I feel, by the way, if you suffer from eating disorder, this one might trigger you, so I would just skip forward 10 minutes or something. I punish myself through refusing to eat. I feel deep hatred toward myself. My parents were always really strict and had big expectations, which I could never fulfill because anything I did was not enough and was wrong. Therefore, I'm scared of making any little or big decision because no choice would be good enough. I've always felt I'm not good enough no matter what I do, and I question every day, and I question everything I do daily. I can't trust myself, and I am suicidal. Whenever my mom wants to give me food, I refuse, saying I'm not hungry, but truly I am hungry, but I think that I don't deserve to eat. End of comment. So I don't know if this person suffers from OCPD, but there are some elements that their parents were very strict, that they had big expectations that they would never fulfill, and they have deep hatred toward themselves, and they're trying to be very, I'm scared of making any decision because no choice will be good enough. This is the underpinning of OCPD and pathological perfection. You can be perfectionistic and not have it be pathological, but this is really pathological perfectionism, right? You're not good enough no matter what you do. There's a lot of suffering involved, that kind of thing. All right. So in this type, again, they're obsessed with their own impulses. They're obsessed with their impulses around food or their impulses around, not working, their impulses to do things that are irresponsible or self-indulgent or something. And they, as children, they were rejected and or punished because they were bad and they were irresponsible. And as a result, they develop this schema around constantly trying to avoid that abandonment by punishing themselves, by denying themselves. But then it becomes too much and they become debilitated, and then they will just give up and fall off the wagon. So in my conceptualization, people in this type can be focused on the following things. Not everyone focuses on these things, but these are some common examples. They might be vacillating between an overly healthy lifestyle versus being extremely unhealthy. They might be vacillating between oversaving and then overspending. Restricting a diet versus eating whatever, binging. Being sober versus binge drinking. Being overly productive and then being lazy for a while. So if underneath all of this is a deep shame around imperfection and having a flaw, then this is, in my conceptualization, a prime example of obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. There's often an internal dynamic between masochistic self-punishment and rebellious self-indulgence. So they're, self-punishment by making themselves follow a certain regimen, and then they vacillate to a different position of rebellious self-indulgence and being upset. But they're upset either way. They're upset when they're disciplined, and they're upset when they're letting go. So internally, they might say something like, I have to punish myself for being bad. So someone who has a problem with like spending, they might be like, I've spent too much. I have to save and save and save and save. I can't spend any money. I have to be extremely miserly about my money. I have to cancel my Netflix account. I have to find a cheaper car, or I have to get rid of my car. Something along those lines. But then they'll vacillate to another internal voice of, hey, I deserve to binge, but and this is too much. I can't do this anymore. I can't be so uptight all the time. But and then they sort of let go. But then they have this other voice that says they're terrible and they're a terrible human being for doing so. And then they just sort of fall into a depression and they lack motivation during this time. And this is often a recreation of a toxic dynamic when they were a child, meaning that they were pressured as a child to be perfect in a certain way, and they had two voices inside their head. They wanted to please their parent, their caregiver, but they also just wanted to let go, and neither position was rewarded or attuned to by the parents. So again, all of this, if it is OCPD, is driven by what I call flaw shame, or shame of flaws, shame of imperfections. And it manifests in this constant drive of perfection, this constant drive of, I gotta be the best, I have to be perfect in this lifestyle thing. And then it becomes too much because no one can do it. No one can sustain that forever. And then you can't do a gray zone, so you just give up completely. Why? And also, as someone wrote on Reddit, if they by choice give up and become indulgent, self-indulgent, then at least they have some control over it. At least they're choosing to fall off the wagon. And there's a tremendous amount of suffering on the inside, and the person never feels like they're okay. They never feel like they can just relax and be spontaneous and just allow their own impulses to drive what they need to do. And it's very difficult to deal with. So this is just one type of OCPD, or pathological perfectionism. And in the rest of the episode, I'm going to go into all the other types, of which there are very different other types. This is the Psychology and Sound podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. As I said earlier, this episode is just for patrons of the podcast. So if you want to hear this full episode, you have to become a patron of the podcast by going to patreon.com. When you become a patron, you'll get instructions on how to access this entire episode, along with all the other deep dives on OCPD, along with all my other deep dives on various other things, of which there are hundreds. So go to patreon.com and become a patron of the podcast if you want to.